You are listening to the Love Unplugged podcast, episode 148. What is key to becoming our best self in life, but also as a leader in our industry and business? It actually comes down to our emotional intelligence. What many entrepreneurs come to realize is that the more you scale and grow your business, it actually becomes less about strategy, but more about the skill set. And that's why today's conversation is such an important one. So what exactly is emotional intelligence and how can we develop it? So grab yourself a pen and notebook and let's dive right in. Hey there, I'm your host, Jessica Fergon, and I am passionate about doing the inner work needed to reach your goals. Let me be your guide as we navigate all the fears and insecurities that surface when it's time to step outside of your comfort zone. Along with my knowledgeable guests and industry experts, I'm here to teach you how to reawaken your life purpose and passion and create the steps to turn your intentions into action. Ultimately, my goal is to empower you to rise above those blocks holding you back and start living a life that you are worthy and deserving of. So come on, it's time to slow down, find a comfy spot with your favorite organic tea, and get inspired. Thank you for tuning in to the Love Unplugged podcast. Hello, loves. Today I am joined by the lovely Karlyn Percil. Karlyn empowers women to lead, live, and engage authentically daily at work, in life, and in love. She's the CEO of KDPM Consulting Group, partnering with Fortune 500 organizations across North America to challenge unsafe workplaces and cultures that negatively impact the lives of Black and Indigenous women of color. As a certified emotional intelligence and neuro life coach, she supports women through her transformational courses and tools, as well as her sister talk circles to empower them to live their boldest, most beautiful life. Welcome, Karlyn. I am so incredibly honored to have you as my guest on the show. I'm so excited to learn more about your story, which I found so inspirational. But before we start and dive into that, I would love for you to share a little bit more about you personally for those that don't know you yet.
Oh, thank you so much, Jessica. Thanks for having me on. I am looking forward to our conversation. So those of you who might be meeting me for the first time, as always, where do I start? Because Karlyn Percil is very multifaceted, and I feel like I'm always on this discovery of knowing myself, and that always shows up in a different self-expression in terms of my creative output and my purpose. And currently right now, I would say that my focus is running a KDPM Group as a CEO, founder, and creative director. We have 3 different brands. One, the Success System, which is a suite of products rooted in neuroscience, how the brain works, positive psychology, and also how to live your values and your life with intention. So in this collection, we have success planners, we have habits, journals to to improve your habits, coloring book in terms of self-compassion, as well as we have EQ-based cards to help individuals to practice in terms of the emotional clarity and emotional awareness. And at KDPM, we also have the Leap to Equity program, which is our corporate program, really focused on helping C-suite leaders, people leaders, and people and culture innovators to help create a more equitable culture in the workplace. And this program is a certification program where we equip leaders with the tools and the skills for them to increase not just their racial equity lens, but also how to lead with equity in mind. And we also have our Sister Talk brand, which really is focused on gender equity, intersectional gender equity, where we bring women together to not just celebrate the goals and the brilliance, but also provide community in different ways, so that we can continue to be braver in life with each other. So that's it in a nutshell. I was born and raised in the Caribbean, in St. Lucia, the only female island in the Caribbean, 160,000 people, small island with lots of lush vegetation. And I always feel so grateful that I was chosen to be born in a country where the people, the land, and the light really is the essence of who we are. I currently live in Toronto, Canada. I'm married. My husband is Maltese. also have that, small island vibe as well. We are just growing, learning, and just really trying to build a life where we can actually live this world empty in terms of sharing our gifts with the rest of the world.
I love what you do. And I think that it's absolutely critical to us, especially these days, to be able to work on that emotional intelligence and to be able to get through some of the traumas that we've had, to be able to show up as our better selves, to be able to work through all of that and be able to lead in it from a better place. I love what you do. And I just can't thank you enough for putting that out into the world. In regards to St. Lucia, that's on my bucket list.
Oh, you have to visit. And now that we're connected, you now have your personal recommended by Karlyn list in terms of where to go and how to really experience the island.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned lush, because that's always the word that I use to describe St. Lucia. Every time I look at it, it just looks so incredibly lush. Like, it's so beautiful.
Yes, yes, yes.
All right. So let's start at the very beginning. Before you had the idea for starting your business, what was your journey like? What was your experience? What were you doing?
So my journey, my background has always been in banking. In the Caribbean, you either have, the options are you work for the government or you work for the bank, because these were the two, I would guess you can say, major career tracks available, or, a teacher as well. So for me, banking was the go-to. And I spent about 9 years in banking operations in St. Lucia, and eventually moved to Toronto because I wanted to go back to school and also just broaden my horizons and opportunities. And moving to Canada, I thought that my experiences would really help move my career along, because my track record, I'd opened a branch, I had led training for our staff, our frontline staff, working on the operations and the technology side. And when I moved to Canada, I thought that, I could just continue with my track record around optimizing people, processes, and systems. And I think this was my first culture shock in terms of understanding that it's a totally different culture up here. And as much as I knew it would have been, I thought that my skills and my track record was enough for me to go on. And I often, say that I always knew I'm a Black woman, but in Canada was when I knew that my Blackness is weaponized in a certain way. Because in the Caribbean, it's a melting pot. We have folks from all different ethnicities, different culture. And as much as, yes, colonization is still very rampant and alive in terms of our cultural norms, there is still a bit of, you don't feel that you're being held back because your race is a factor or an issue. So when I moved to Toronto, that was one of the very first glaring, I guess you can say, elephants, right? That for me, and also having conversations with other immigrants, from other countries, whether it was Central America or Latin America, and also the Caribbean as well. We all found that theme, whether it was our ethnic, our ethnicity or our race, was the one thing that we kept on coming up against in terms of career advancement, and also just being treated fairly by managers or supervisors who, yes, they might have the social clout in terms of they probably went to school, with the same people in the C-suite, or have that identity because they're in each other's communities and so forth. But for a lot of us, what we noticed was there was a huge cultural gap in terms of the cultural competency or cultural humility by leaders who did not necessarily have the insight from our ethnic and our cultural aspects. So that led me to and I'm the kind of person, and it's advice my grandfather gave me, where he said that if you can't change something, you change the way you think about it. Right. My grandfather, he didn't really talk much. He didn't really complain. And if he did, then that he had something to say and something needed to be made right. So for me, the first couple of years, as a new employee and a new, individual in a new country, I simply kept my head down, Jessica. I try to find my zones of, belonging. I'm like, where do I feel like I belong? And, there were different networks and groups, women's groups and and networks celebrating Caribbean culture that I was a part of. But then that wasn't enough, because in my performance review, I got feedbacks, such as, you come across as very aggressive, maybe you need to tone down, you're too passionate, like all those stereotypes that's rooted in anti-Blackness. And to be quite honest, I didn't have the language for it back then, because back then we weren't having brave and courageous conversations in the leadership room. Everything still very, status quo, maintaining a Eurocentric lens or white gaze as a leadership norm. And when that happens in the workplace, there isn't a lot of room, to celebrate ethnic diversity or cultural diversity in terms of, my whole and full self. And this is also why I say that, as a Black woman, and a lot of, clients that I work with who happen to be Black or women of color, you can't really bring your whole self to work, because there are so many barriers that prevents that. So it's very hard to, not notice the thing that's getting in the way of your flow. And being a, Pisces with a Cancer rising, I don't know if there's anyone else who loves astrology as much as I do. um, you can feel it, right? You can feel when something's not right. And also, as someone who have been, I've been on my self-love journey for as long as I can remember, and learning to trust my intuition and taking action on it, being courageous with the inner notifications that I get, to me is a form of self-love, is one of my highest love languages. And not being able to practice that felt like I was slowly betraying myself. And I know what that feels like, Jessica, when you're in that place where your self-betrayal is louder than your ability to show up for yourself and your ability for you to act courageously. That led me to a place of, depression, insomnia. I was finding it very hard to go to work. My passion for the work that I do, and I really love what I did, started to dwindle. And I call it the longest chapter of being unhappy at work. And it was a long chapter. I think I was in that funk for like a good 7, almost a decade. And this long story all to say, because when I think about where I'm at right now, the tools I've developed, even the areas that I studied, like I got interested in emotional intelligence and decided to study it after, I found a coach who really helped me to understand, where those blocks were, and, how, my lack of self-awareness in terms of understanding my emotional data also contributed to my lack of, self-management, my ability for me to understand, okay, what do I need right now in this particular moment? How can I better support myself so that I could better support my team and my coworkers? So everything that I do right now in KDPM Group and our holdings, everything came from that place of, yes, it started off as I needed to get rid of this barrier, the systemic barrier, or in some cases, the psychological barrier. And it resulted in discovering like the power that we do have in terms of my own personal sphere of influence. As much as there might be systemic barriers at play, there is so much that I can do in terms of visioning and focusing on building a community that can support me and my goals, and also bringing others along with me, and also discovering that there are other people who had the same or similar struggles to myself. I realized that there is strength in numbers and in community. So I created, different groups. I created a Caribbean network. I also created a women's network, and which is where Sister Talk was birthed.
Wow. Now I can't even imagine having gone through that. Like, as a woman in the corporate world, I've experienced, the issues around being a woman in that workplace, and, the men's club, and, pay inequality, or getting comments being like, that was too emotional or anything like that. And that's infuriating to me. So to add a whole other level of being a different race, which has nothing to do with anything, like, you're fully capable as anybody else to do the job, and to get that kind of treatment is just infuriating. Like, how did you deal with those emotions? Because you were in that situation for quite some time. Like, that must have been super challenging to manage the emotions that you must have been feeling.
Oh, it was, and you just named it. It's infuriating, but also as a Black woman who had been tone policed, and that is also one of the stereotypes. You can't
Mhm.
really, share that frustration in the workplace because it's not psychologically safe to do so. So for me, what did I do with that emotion? I do what we all do. I suppress it. I stuff it. I use work to, put the band-aid on it, right? What do we do when we are sitting in a zone of discomfort? We work harder, right? We prove our way through it, or we please our way through it, or we weren't taught that it's okay for us to disagree, or in some cases even name the system, right? We have so many opportunities for us as women, especially those of us who hold, the systemic power. When you look at, to your point, imagine, yes, not being invited to the old boys club, and also still being expected to show up and work twice as hard, and also still being expected to work through conditions of systemic oppression, but you're still supposed to show up, play nice, say all the right things, but don't complain too much, right? And I think we, white women who happen to hold a lot of the systemic power, because with the work that I do in the C-suite, there is an overrepresentation of whiteness, but we don't talk about the system that continue that overrepresentation to flourish, and we use language and band-aids such as, yeah, we have a DI initiative and we're going to get more representation of people from other diversity dimensions, whether that's ethnicity or race, gender, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's quite harmful for us to bring in that representation without naming the systems at play that cause the harm and that contribute to the harm, because none of us win. White women don't win, Black women don't win, Indigenous women don't win when we don't name the systems of oppression at play at our different intersecting identities. So for me, it's yes, I in the beginning, because I didn't really have the capacity. I often say that I was emotionally constipated
Oh,
because
yeah.
because you take that emotion, you hold it, and you're like, what do I do with it? And because you're holding it, right, you're holding the shame and the guilt, there is now this like I said, this big bucket of self-betrayal, and you don't know what to do with it. It doesn't belong, because we carry our emotions in our body. So you feel it. You feel it on your shoulders, you feel it in your neck, you feel it when you can't sleep, you feel that weight that you're carrying. But sometimes all you do is that you just sit with it and you stare at it. And this is also why one of the tools that I created in the Success Planner, one of the products in the Success System, was the commitment statement and the permission slip. I literally had to write a permission slip to myself, Jessica, to sit and have a pity party with my emotions, with all the things that came up. Because sometimes as women, we're conditioned and socialized to go and be the fixer,
Hmm.
right? But no one tells us that before we save the world. And I think it's Bell Hooks who said that. She talks about in All About Love, the biggest lesson she learned, that to save herself first before going to save the world. And I think that was the most powerful lesson I did. In the beginning, I tried to save the world while ignoring the harm it inflicted on me. And I guess you can say now what I've done is to flip it, where I'm acknowledging the harm that's been done, because it's a huge part of my ability to do this work in a way that doesn't cost me my sanity, right, and my psychological well-being. So now I'm focused on how can I take care of Karlyn first, so that I can show up more powerfully for my community and for the people I serve.
Well, you're doing it well. You're doing it very well. So good for you. I definitely want to learn more about how you're doing that, how you're supporting yourself, but we'll dive into that a little bit later.
Yes.
All right. So you're in this place, you're working in corporate, you've been there for quite some time. Obviously, things are not the ideal situation for you. How did the idea for starting this business come to be? And how did you feel about stepping away from this career that you had been working towards for quite some time, all this time that you've invested, obviously all this emotion that you've
Mhm.
also invested into that period of time? How did you feel about leaving that to kind of go off on your own?
It was scary because, 20 years, at the bank, what everybody tells, oh, wait for the pension. You invested so much time, you know, and it's true. I did, and I have, and I had a very good, track record at the bank. But I don't know. There's something to be said about I always liken a job to like a bad, relationship or a bad boyfriend, girlfriend, or whoever, right? Is in your situationship, right? Like if the guy, have showed you that, hey, I don't respect you, I don't really value you. I'm only gonna, use you for my benefit. I don't really care what your needs are. Yes, you've told me your love language and what matters to you, but I'm choosing to ignore it. Why would I knowingly stay in this relationship?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know what I mean? And for me, that's what it felt like, I mean, I had given the bank my all, everything. I think as most of us do. I mean, even watching the whole conversation right now around quiet quitting, it's such a disservice to humans in the workplace. And I think that, we're at a very exciting time right now where workers are now understanding, not just, from a human rights perspective, but what have we allowed, capitalism or corporate or, whatever language that you'd like to use, how can we co-create a working condition that really honors the full humanity of who we are as humans? Because you give it your all and you do all the things, and you hear leaders continuously say that people are the most important and we want to center our people. But the actions don't match up with the conversations in town halls and on the DEI plans and mandates. It's like one thing is written on paper, but the actions of the leaders and leaders are also not being held accountable to those metrics. So in some way you're going through this cognitive dissonance around, you're being gaslighted, but you're also trying to convince yourself that, things will get better next year. Let's just wait. When you're hoping, that potential, how we all fall in love with somebody's potential. Oh
Yes.
man, it's the worst thing we can do with our lives and with ourselves. I think it's so much more important for us to face the truth, no matter how hard it is, where, you realize that, hey, this person doesn't value me as much as, and in my case, it was this organization doesn't value me as much as they say they value me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it was very scary and fearful because I'm losing all this. Like I'm going on my own. I don't really have, I mean, as a new immigrant in this country, I didn't have the social network either. Right. I'm just finding my way around, and I still am in so many ways, especially as a new business owner. But I had, done enough work, especially at that time. I was really deep on my self-love journey. I was teaching classes on it, outside of work. And also a lot of the things that I was learning from taking my emotional intelligence. I trained with, Daniel Goleman and a few other organizations. And then I did my neuroscience coaching certificate. And the more I learned, the more I realized that, hey, you owe it to yourself and to your team to do better. So I actually started, creating those like mini coaching programs for my team. I redesigned how we work in terms of starting the week off with really focusing on what are the key items that we need to focus on, what will really drive the end metrics that we need. And all of that led to, folks, like some of my team members, I guess they shared it with other partners that they were working with in different departments in terms of, well, here's this one page of this worksheet that we use in my team to help us to stay focused on, tasks that really drive our bottom line and that really influence and impact our end of year, performance review. And other folks, heard about it. And I started getting email. Folks are like, can you add me to the, your monthly list of, and I'm like, well, that's for my team. And it's very specific to our department goals. But long story short, a lot of what I was using on myself to stay focused on my goals and the things that I wanted to accomplish and with my team, I started sharing it with others. The things that I went through, if I went through a very challenging task or interaction with my, supervisor, I would write out a note to myself or post it on LinkedIn. So folks just started hearing more and more. And as I shared more, I realized that there was an audience. So I started doing workshops and lunch. I call them lunch and grow sessions for anyone who was interested way before I left the bank, because there was a demand for it. One, and two, by the time I made the decision to leave, I already had a few workshops. I was known for, my self-love and compassion, programs, and also looking at productivity and goal setting from a holistic point of view, which included, taking care of yourself and practicing emotional intelligence on a day-to-day basis. So a lot of those things, as much as it was scary, I also, as my mentor, when my friends Claudette McGowan says, she's like, trust your track record. And that really helped me to look at my track record and to use that, or to leverage that, I would say, to increase my belief in myself and in my, what I was producing. And that really helped me as I transitioned from the bank full time. I went to another bank part time as a consultant. And then after that, I just went fully on my own.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned, like, look at your track record. And that's something that I've had brought to my attention quite a bit this year, as I've had to make quite a few big decisions, and I'm still in that process. But like, we tend to forget everything that we've accomplished and how much we're capable of doing, and how amazing we do when we like work on something and we just kind of look at this moment as like a blank slate, and you're like, I don't know if I can do this. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I'm like, I got to this point. Exactly. I didn't get to this point doing nothing and not succeeding and not doing well. Like, there's a reason why I've had all this success and that I'm in this position to be able to do this next step. So it's so interesting that you were able to do that.
And this is why too, the success system, Jessica, that's why I created it, because same, exactly what you just said. And also, we live in a culture that really celebrates perfectionism and urgency. Right. So we ourselves, of course, we're caught up in it because we exist in this world and we don't live in silos. But, when I think about this culture of perfectionism and urgency, it feels unnatural for you to pause and celebrate your wins and to focus on what worked well and what didn't work well, right? But when we look at how huge organizations are run, that's exactly how they perform the business. There is always a feedback loop, right? What are we doing? What are the steps we took? What worked well? What didn't work well? And what can we do better moving forward? We have to make space for wisdom. If we don't make space for self-reflection, we run the risk of living somebody else's life, because there's so many external influences. And to your point, yes, I'm pretty sure before you started this podcast, you were scared to start a podcast, right?
God, yes.
No. I'm pretty sure you didn't know half of what you know right now. And because the brain, so one of the fascinating things in the research when I did my neuroscience coaching certificate is that positive experiences, the brain treats them like Teflon. Right? So it doesn't recognize it because the brain is designed to keep us safe. It is not here to make us happy or to help us, to feel joy. We have to program our brain for the life that we want. So negative experiences or anything outside of our comfort zone, the brain flags it as a risk factor, as you're starting something new. Well, I don't know about that, Karlyn, because I don't have a track record for that particular thing. And no one tells us that your brain is supposed to do that. That is actually, an indication that you have a healthy working brain. So, redefining our relationship with uncertainty, with emotional uncertainty, redefining our relationship with the pause, and telling ourselves that slowing down and a pause is just as effective as a go, right? Creating space for self reflection, creating space to actually, look at your life and notice the areas where am I really living by my values? Or am I still unconsciously trying to, please my mom or please my dad or please, whichever authority figure that we think will give us this sense of, self-worth or feeling seen and heard and valued for who we are. So yeah, trusting your track record but also creating space and writing it somewhere where you can revisit it is extremely important because this is how we continue building on our self-confidence bank account.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned, creating time to like pause and reflect, because I think that especially as entrepreneurs, you know how busy it gets. You get so caught up in the day to day and you have all these goals that you want to accomplish and you're constantly just like hustling to a degree, and you can get so caught up in it. And sometimes when you get so lost in the shuffle of things, you can lose sight of like what is actually truly important to you. Like, what is your actual definition of success? Like, are you still aligned with that? Do you need to revisit it? Has it shifted? Are you showing up the way that you want? Like, there's just so much that you need to take time to reflect on so that you don't lose yourself in the process.
Ah, yes, so well said. And everything that you just mentioned, when you look at some of our successful thought leaders or the people we look up to, they all did that.
Mm-hmm.
They all paused. They all created space for that self-reflection because it's in those, in between moments we get to your point, make adjustments because life has also shifted, right? And it continues to shift.
Oh God,
So
yeah.
it also gives us room for us to be also hear ourselves and also to be aligned with the most authentic truth in this current season that we're in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh, I love that. Okay, so I want to dive into emotional intelligence, but before we get into that, I want to learn about your experience starting and growing your business, but when it comes to the biggest lessons that you've learned along the way and some wins that you've experienced where you're just like, holy crap, I just accomplished this. And what did you do to celebrate that?
Oh gosh, such a good one. Okay, what was the first one? Some biggest lesson learned? I would say the biggest lesson learned, so far, I've been, running full time for, about 6 years now, would be actually, it's actually based on a quote by one of my favorite books, Women Who Run with Wolves by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. The biggest lesson I learned is learning to trust my intuition and trusting the pace and the season of my life. Because the pace and season of my life looks very different from, other entrepreneurs. Because yeah, there is a message around entrepreneurship and you have to hustle and et cetera, et cetera. But I found that the biggest hustle where I have gotten the biggest rewards were the ones where I learned to listen to that inner voice and I trust my intuition and I paused or I, said no, or I actually did the opposite of what everyone else was doing. So being the purple cow in your business and is so important. And the quote by Clarissa, I'd like to share it because I actually have it on one of my bookmarks because again, I carry the words of powerful women with me because it encourages me to keep dreaming bigger and to not settle in my life. And it says, practice listening to your intuition, your inner voice. Ask questions. Be curious. See what you see, hear what you hear, and then act upon what you know to be true. These intuitive powers were given to your soul at birth. And taking this leap and being an entrepreneur, I find that this is what I practice and this is the lesson that keeps coming up over and over and over again, because I'm pretty sure like you found that as an entrepreneur you don't have this cookie cutter bento box prescriptive menu list of what you're supposed to do.
Oh, apparently it's missing.
Right. But what no one told us is that entrepreneurship is actually where you practice that intuition. And you are an entrepreneur because you saw a gap. You noticed that there was something missing in this world. And remember, we all inherited this world. This world wasn't designed for us. This world was designed for men. And we happen to, fit our way into it. If you think about even the labor laws and workplace, norms, how were they created? They were created because women had to come in and help, right? Remember when the men went to war, and I'm not even talking yet about black women and getting equal rights and pay equity and all of that, but we always had to fit into a particular space or container, whatever it might be. Even the whole definition of what it means to be a woman. I mean, pretty sure you have many instances in your life where folks or people, well-meaning people, tell you that, you're not behaving, quote unquote, how women are supposed to behave. I've gotten that as well. My sides of my head are shaved. And there's some folks who think that my look isn't, quote unquote, professional for a woman. And I'm like, but who defined professional? We get to define it. So I feel like entrepreneurship is this ever evolving set of guidelines that we are writing. And we don't know what they are yet. We only know when we show up fearlessly and bravely and boldly in our lives, and we get to write it. So that's the biggest lesson. I think that's a lesson I will always continue to learn. And what was the second question again?
Biggest wins.
Oh, biggest wins. I think my biggest win, was, last year when we launched our Leap to Equity program, our corporate offering and training. There was one particular client that we worked with. We trained, all 3,000 of the employees, and it was a pretty, big contract and big deal. And we learned that one of the top companies was also at the table, for that very same contract, and to learn that, it went to us. And I remember speaking to one of the senior people at that company that we beat, and she was like, oh, I heard, KDPM got the contract. And she's like, you know what? She's like, it was such an honor to be at the table with you. And I'm glad it went to you, versus that particular company. And they're pretty huge. They serve all of Canada. And it was very, humbling. And it was such a, hey, Karlyn, you did that moment. You know what I mean? Because to be at that table with in such company is really quite amazing. And I guess my other big win was also teaching this for McKinsey and Company, the Global Black Executive Network, running a program with those executives globally was also very, very awesome to be in community and in space with Black executives globally, because the numbers are still very low. But to be able to be in community with them was such a great win as well. And how did I celebrate? I either celebrate with spa days.
Yes.
Any of these, because getting a massage or reminding myself to take a break is sometimes, I forget. But it was really great to celebrate with a massage. And I am such a fan of supporting Black designers or women of color in terms of fashion and design. So there's always a piece that I purchase from one of my favorite designers to commemorate this particular moment.
I love that. And I love that you took time to celebrate, because we often forget to do that. We always kind of move on to the next, or we don't realize what we just accomplished. We don't take that moment to be like, oh, this just happened.
I know.
So that's awesome. And yes to the spa days. Like, if that's the only thing that I ever do to like celebrate anything in my life going forward, I'm like all for it. Massage a week, I'm great.
Cosign.
All right, so let's dive into emotional intelligence. So what exactly is that for those that aren't quite familiar with that term and they're stepping into the entrepreneur or leadership role and they're looking to develop that skill?
Yes, it's emotional intelligence actually makes up for over, some research say over 50 to 70% of our success in the workplace or in life in general. Uh, um, and it's often defined as the ability to perceive, use, manage our emotions and how to handle, conflict and also flexibility in the workplace and in life. It's probably, I would say, the most important skill for humans, not just leaders, for everyone to have, because our ability to perceive our emotion can really help us to understand our capacity in any given moment, whether it's in a high stake conversation or managing conflict. If you can understand that, hey, I'm in this space, I'm having this conversation, and what that person just said, it really angered me. If you can honor yourself and notice that anger, and you can say that, I feel that anger in my stomach, Jessica, and I'm so mad, my fists are clenched, and I just want to, like, punch somebody, or I just want to say something that's really hurtful. Like, if you have the ability for you to notice, so that's the self-awareness piece, because now you can feel that emotional energy in your body. It's in my hands, it's in my chest. You know what that action is. So this is where your self-management, or your awareness comes in terms of what your action would, like, you know, you might do or you will do. And the other part of emotional intelligence is really on that social intelligence piece. Like, how are you now using that awareness around how you feel, what's happening in the conversation, and how that emotion is influencing your behavior. So now you're in that setting. I'm having a conversation with, let's say, my boss, or a colleague on my team, and I'm feeling, very uncomfortable, but I know this emotion. I know where it's coming from. The last time I felt this way was when I was in another space where I felt like I wasn't being seen, or I wasn't being heard, or someone just totally, just walked over my comments and did not acknowledge what I just said. So now you have all this data. You can now look at your social setting, and you can choose a different outcome that will positively impact the relationships that you're building in this particular space and moment in time. So instead of, acting unconsciously, where, and we've all been there, where you've all seen it, where, something is said or done, and you feel the emotions as you're charged in it. Maybe you feel a bit shame, shame comes up for you, the action, the reaction from that particular thing. And, usually when you feel shame or you feel guilty, you tend to either not speak, or you minimize yourself, or you minimize your voice. That awareness gives us the capacity for us to tap into that understanding, and then we get to choose a different outcome. So you're not betraying yourself in the moment. You're not, making yourself feel small. You're actually using the intelligence of your emotions to still show up and to still choose an outcome that is in alignment with your goals. Meaning that, hey, I still like Jessica, I still want to have a relationship with her, but I also want to communicate to her, in a values aligned way, what what she said brought up for me, and I'm still honoring and seeing her in her full humanity, and not also diminishing her because I feel uncomfortable in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
So that is emotional intelligence, one on one. I like breaking it down for folks because sometimes it feels like it's this, oh, we all have intelligence around our emotions, right? But some of us have a higher level of self-awareness than others. And I'm pretty sure you've been on the receiving end where, you've had to give someone feedback, and they're totally unaware how their words or what they said or did impacted you.
Oh God, yeah. And I know I've had my own moments, right? Like, we've all been there.
We've all been there. We've all been there. And this is where self-awareness is so important, because even if you did inadvertently said something, or you harmed someone in some way, or maybe you thought you didn't, and someone came back and they give you the feedback, that ability to be aware of your emotions and understanding your self-management tools. So for example, if you're like, man, someone gave me that feedback, I don't know what to do. Now you're aware. You're like, I don't have any self-management tools in terms of how do I apologize or how do I acknowledge the harm that I've done. But with that awareness, you can now go and say, hey, Karlyn, do you have any suggestions of what I can do? As opposed to someone with zero or very low self-awareness will just stick their head in the sand, or in some cases double down on the wrong or the harm that they have done. And again, now you have this relationship that has now been damaged, and you're moving further and further away from repairing the harm. And of course, in the long term, you will actually lose that relationship, or in some cases use credibility, because you have now demonstrated you do not have the ability for you to hold such conversations.
That's so good. So interesting.
It is. It's fascinating. I love emotions. And the more I dive into the research, I realize how much power we have, right? Because at the end of every interaction, what we create is an emotion. Like even this conversation, when we're done, if I ask you to describe what's the one emotion, Jessica, our conversation, what came up for you? What was that one thing that you feel in terms of the emotion at the end of this conversation? And a lot of us don't realize that we create emotions, right? We're not triggered. And the work of Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, she's the author of How Emotions Are Made and 7.5 Lessons of the Brain. It's just fascinating how powerful we are and how we can use the brain to create, or in some cases, to change or transcend an emotion that isn't serving the greater good in terms of our lives and our intended impact.
I love that. That's so good. This is such a good episode. Just that alone, I'm like, well, what else are you going to be sharing with us here?
That we all have the power to create the reality that we want. And the more we increase our capacity, our emotional capacity, then we increase our capacity for having braver conversations. Like I see it a lot in my work, Jessica. Like we're talking about race, and a lot of our leaders, especially in the C-suite, they haven't had a lot of opportunities to talk about race because their circles happen to be there's this homophily bias that happens, right? Meaning that everyone around you looks like you probably went to the same school, you have the same interests, you eat the same foods. So there is a lot of room for you to maybe experience other cultural norms, or and other conversations or social cues from a different culture. So yes, there will be a bit of discomfort around having those conversations. But I have also seen where a lot of leaders take that discomfort as a sign of personal weakness. Mm-hmm. And they either sit in the fear and say nothing, or in some cases, like I said, argue for their limitation, right? Meaning that they're not willing to do the learning. They really just want to stay with the limited consciousness around this particular topic, whether it's race, or whether it's, anti-Semitism, whatever it might be. And the one thing that's separating those courageous leaders who raise their hand and speak with a shaky voice and say, you know what, Karlyn, I might say the wrong thing, but I also know that not leaning into this discomfort isn't going to help me as a leader. I want to be a better leader. I want to show up more fully for my staff and my organization, and I actually want to leave this role better than I found it. So those leaders, they actually choose to increase their intelligence around their emotional discomfort. And this is how we create more inclusive workspaces, a better world. Because if we each leverage the power of our emotions or the intelligence around it, and we understand that discomfort is just a natural part of the journey, emotional discomfort is a natural part of learning and unlearning, then we create more capacity for us to build a much, much better world.
I love that. And a lot of people find that discomfort is like a bad thing, but it's actually not. It's a lesson, right? So I always found that even as an entrepreneur, like when you're just speaking specifically towards that type of a journey, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because you're going to be there a lot, and it's going to grow you and teach you so many lessons. It's going to make you an overall better human, but also a better leader, a better business owner.
Yeah. Yes, yes, yes.
Absolutely. Okay, so how do we develop and improve our emotional intelligence?
Oh, that one is such a good one. Every day there are opportunities for you to do so. I often say you don't have to go to Tuscany and sit under this perfect tree and, have this whole, life awakening moment. Life gives us an opportunity every single day to be a better human. And that's what's really great about it. Because if you're present in your life, right, or you're mindful, you increase your capacity to be present for the lessons that you need in the season that you're in. I always say that you will always be called to practice what you need the most.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So for me, my theme word for this year is grace, right? And sometimes I find myself in situations where I'm being called to practice grace. Are you going to be with Karlyn I thought I responded to that email. Oops, sorry. Oops, send another email without the attachment. Like there are so many moments where I was called or invited to practice grace. So a great way for folks to start is create an inventory of your emotional states. And sometimes it's hard. It's hard to put a name on what emotions you're experiencing because our brain is processing multiple emotions at a time. We process over 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day.
Oh, God.
Right? So just imagine. And also, the brain prioritizes nonverbal cues over verbal cues. So again, and they don't teach us those skill sets, in school. I honestly think it needs to be mandatory because here we are as adults, we didn't see, sometimes healthy, communication or emotional skills being modeled as children growing up, right? In our primary homes or maybe even in school. And there we are as adults and we're thrown into this, what do I call it? I call it this, I don't know, this one pot called life, this pot of, so many different things coming at us. And then we're told to, oh, by the way, please show up and still do it perfectly. Don't mess up. And we want an answer ASAP. And it's like, no, we can't. I'm feeling all the things. I don't even know how to regulate myself. We're managing all those different, anxiety and overwhelm and all the things. And we also happen to be living and working in a society where, it's urgency and perfectionism. So how do you counter that? So creating an inventory of emotional states, like, just being aware of your emotional self and your choice. In the success planner, in the success system, in our product line, we actually created a daily habit tracker. And also in the Thrive Wellness Center, we encourage folks to actually write. And you don't need to have the planner to do it, but it's helpful because we've already broken it down for you based on how the brain works. But you can just choose a paper, you can just draw it out and just every day. And if you're not sure what the emotion is, I say start with the one that you'd like to notice. Like, what does joy feel like in my body? Or what does, sadness feel like? I want to really understand my sadness language. Or maybe it's, what does love feel like? Or maybe it's guilt. You want to see how you react to guilt. So choosing that emotional state and then just every day, just notice in the morning, afternoon or evening, or maybe after an interaction with someone, notice how you feel. And put a name on the emotion. And you can just Google, an emotional wheel, and you can also print that and have this, on the board so that you can increase your emotional literacy skills. Because the research shows the more we are able to name our emotions as we increase our emotional literacy skills, the more we are better able to not just manage ourselves, but also to lower our stress. We can improve our communication skills, we improve our decision making skills, and most importantly, we also improve our relational skills with others.
I love that. That's such great advice, and I'm definitely going to check out your habit tracker. That seems like something I might want to get.
Yes, the Better Habits Journal is really focused on helping build rituals because sometimes it's hard for folks to do a whole year, right? In terms of a planner, we have the success system that is, yeah, there's every Monday there's an affirmation. And during the week, we actually have a note. Like, at the time we're recording this, the inner transformation tip for the week is to write a love note to yourself. right? And that's such an important practice in terms of if you're a CEO. I mean, especially if you're a CEO, every day, life is testing, your confidence level
Oh my
because,
God, yes.
right? Because you start off one day and you're like, yes, I know where I'm going, where I'm taking the company, and we're gonna do all those things, and then life shows up and you're like, okay, not back to square one, but you know what I mean in terms of really, leaning deep on your intuition and on your confidence and your ability for you to show up and to stay consistent. And that's another thing too. When you improve your emotional literacy skills, you can also increase your consistency and your discipline around the things that matter the most. And, folks tend to say that, hey, I'm not disciplined, Karlyn. I'm like, well, you are disciplined. We're all disciplined. If you think about the 24 hours you have in the day, just do a time audit, right? You were disciplined in something. It might be the wrong thing. Just like me, some days I'm way too disciplined in watching Netflix, right? But I'm disciplined. I'm consistently showing up for that particular thing. So when we notice with that self-awareness, then we can start to shift. And this is where the habit tracker can help you, because then you can start habit stacking. You don't have to change everything overnight. That can cause a huge overwhelm. But you can say, hey, okay, notice today I watched, I don't know, 5 episodes of what's one of my favorite shows, like the Canadian Baking Show, right?
Yes.
I so good. Next day or next week, okay, let's watch one less episode. It's important for us to extend grace to ourselves as we deal with multiple conflicting priorities, as we try to figure out this thing called life. And I know the entrepreneurs of today, I'm very hopeful, a lot of them do have social justice and climate change as part of our mandate, because we live on this earth and we cannot avoid it. We have to be, justice warriors as well. So we're taking on a lot, and we're redefining and we're pivoting, and we are realizing that in order for us to show up fully, we also have to show up fully for the things that we care about. So it's important for us to give ourselves space and give ourselves room so that we can not only speak from a place of our truth, but also create space for us to learn as we go as well. And so that we can also create space and time for us to meet with like-minded entrepreneurs, because we cannot do it alone. We need each other for the journey ahead.
I could listen to you talk all day, to be honest. I love it. I love it so much. All right. So I know that we are running out of time, and I want to be very respectful of the 10
No way. I felt like we just started chatting.
I know. I just want to keep going.
Vancouver for us to do a live in person. We're just going to do a day, and we're just going to chat and just record the pieces that matter.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to know, what do you have available for people to work with you to learn more about, emotional intelligence, how they can be better humans? How can people learn from you? What do you have going on?
We have, so the success system is a great place to start. If you're looking, so our values that we practice, in addition to our ancestral leadership principles, we also focus on 3 main things. We want to help you to deepen your curiosity, meaning that go beyond, tap into your growth mindset, really tap into the brain's ability to be malleable. Compassion. We know that as we move away from our systemic beliefs and our inherited, notions and cultural norms around identity and who we are and so forth, that there will be a bit of self-betrayal, and there will be a feeling, a sense of loss and grief. So it's important for us to bring in compassion for self, so that we can show up and extend compassion to others. And the last one is courage. The courage for you to take bold action, for you to show up for yourself and for the things that really matter. So the success system, all our products are rooted in helping you to live those 3 values out loud, and to practice, those skills. So you can start with the self-love coloring book, which is, yes, there's mindfulness, you can color, but throughout the coloring book, we have lots of deep self-reflective questions, such as, who's in your circle of trust? Take a moment to write and identify the things that you need in your circle of trust. Or also just really questions to help you to define what does the self-love practice look like? So that's one. like I said, Better Habits Journal, which is really just focused on helping you to build rituals, and they are based on 90 days. So you can also start there and start building a morning ritual, an evening ritual, or even just use it to audit the existing rituals that you have right now. And also the success planner is for those who really want to bring in that positive psychology, neuroscience, and practice on a more consistent basis. You can start with the success system, but we also have our stone paper notebooks. I often say our ancestors wrote on stone. So the stone paper notebooks, it's such a great way for you to journal. And these are blank notebooks. There is a quote. When I first left, the bank and stepped into entrepreneurship, I was so afraid, Jessica. I actually wrote myself daily love notes, right? Just little reminders so that I can keep going. So on our stone paper notebook, you'll see a lot of those reminders on there. And of course, at KDPM Group, I mean, there's so many other ways that folks can work with us. And if you go on my website at karlynpercil.com, if you're feeling a bit stuck and you're not sure who your inner critic is, that voice, you can also take our self-saboteur quiz to discover who that person is. I mean, for a long time, mine was, Goldilocks, because everything needed to be right before I took a step forward. Now, because I have built my muscle in terms of trusting my intuition, her voice is, getting more and more quiet as we go, over time. So this is also a place to start. You can take the quiz. It's free. And then also we'll give you some guidance on what you can do to shift from that narrative and from that personality.
Amazing. All right. So I will include the links to all of that in the show notes. So if you are tuning in and you are interested, I will definitely have that included for you. Now, if anybody wants to learn more about you, they want to connect with you, maybe they want to chat with you, where do you hang out online the most?
So they could go to karlynpercil.com and that will lead them to everything else, or Instagram. Occasionally, you'll find me on social media when I do have the capacity to share. That is where you probably would get more of the day-to-day as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing your incredible story, your expertise, and so much knowledge around emotional intelligence. You showing up today just the way that you did, and how eloquent and how you articulated everything. It just proves how much emotional intelligence you've developed, and it's just such an inspiration. And I definitely know that everyone tuning in, including myself, have learned a lot from you today.
Oh, thank you so much, Jessica. That's one of my love languages when I do podcasts is I love hearing from people, what resonated with you the most or what stood out for you. So as folks listen, feel free to reach out, whether you share on LinkedIn or Twitter, or feel free to send an email. What resonated with you the most? Would love to hear from some of you. And thanks so much for having me. It was such a great chat with you. I can't believe an hour has gone by. I felt like we just started talking.
I know, right? I'm Jessica, and thanks for tuning in today to Love Unplugged, the podcast. If there are any questions or topics you'd love answered on the show, head on over to www.projectloveco.com and share your request with me. If you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and share it with a loved one. Your feedback means the world to me, and the community we've created is what fuels our discussions here. After all, this is all for you. Join me next time for another unplugged conversation.